Alright, just imagine for a second that you're a detective, and you get a call in the middle of the night to come inspect a commotion heard in a small business. But when you arrive, you find that the door to the business is locked, but you can't leave because the lady that called you out is insistent that what she heard sounded bad. So you do what any rational detective would do, and force a small child through the tiny transom window above the door. Once the child finally unbolts the door from the inside, you enter the business and find the owner dead, having been shot twice in the chest and once in the left hand. When you take a closer look, scorch marks on his left hand indicate a close-range gunshot, yet there is no gun, there is no killer, there is no escape, and the door was locked from the inside. Pretty weird, right? Well, this was the real-life locked room mystery that Patrolman Albert Kattenborn walked into on March 9, 1929 in Harlem. The murder has since become known as the perfect crime and the impossible murder of Isidor Fink, and is still unsolved today. However, there may be a solution as to how this happened. If you like unsolved mysteries, that's all I do on this channel, so please like and subscribe for more videos like this one. Now, I've set most of the story up already, but to get a clearer picture, let me set the scene. It's 1929 in Harlem, New York. This was very close to the time of the big stock market crash, and as the economy plummeted, crime in the neighborhood had risen. So Polish immigrant Isidor Fink had learned to live in constant fear about being robbed, and was said to be cautious to the point of paranoia. He was obsessive about locking and bolting his windows and doors, especially when working late at night in his small laundry business on E Street. After a certain time of night, only customers that he personally knew were admitted into the laundry. Then on March 9, 1929, Fink had been working late, as he did every Saturday. His business, the 5th Avenue Laundry, was on the ground floor of a tenement building, and the shop's door opened to the street. At about 10:30 p.m. on the night in question, Fink's neighbor, Mrs. Lachlan Smith, who lived behind Fink in the tenement building, heard what sounded like fighting, screaming, and the sounds of blows coming from the laundry. She couldn't tell for sure, but one thing was certain: something wasn't right, so she ran to call for help. She ran into Patrolman Albert Kattenborn. She told him what was going on. They both rushed back to the laundry, and you already know what happened next. The door was locked. Small child goes through the transom window and bolts the door from the inside. They enter and find that Isidor Fink had been shot and killed by 3 close-range gunshots, evidenced by the scorch marks on his left hand. Near Fink's body is a freshly folded pile of laundry and a steaming heated iron that is still on, indicating that he was busy working at the time he was murdered. And since the door was locked from within, this means that either the gun should be nearby or the killer is still inside the laundry. After searching the laundry top to bottom for the killer and finding no one, Kattenborn turned his attention to finding the gun, but he couldn't find one anywhere, and nor could the homicide detectives who arrived shortly after. So wondering if Fink had somehow staged or planned his own death, they went looking for some sort of device that might have catapulted the gun somewhere, and as you probably guessed, they found no such device. So they started checking the laundry for fingerprints, but nothing other than Fink's were found. The detectives were so confused by this that the only thing they could think to do was literally tear the laundry apart. They ripped up the floorboards, they cracked open the walls, they tore down the ceiling panels, they probably destroyed all the evidence as well, but ultimately, they could not come up with an explanation as to how Isidor Fink was shot. So they turned their attention to the only part of the laundry that had not been destroyed yet, the transom window. With the theory now being that the killer shot Fink and then slipped through the narrow transom window. A broken hinge on the transom suggested that the window may have been the escape route, but if this really was the case, the killer would have to be tiny, like small child tiny, and too small for any grown man to crawl through. And even if they could fit, why even bother? Why squeeze through a tiny window when you could open the door and make your getaway that much faster? So then the theory evolved into what if the killer, unable to get through the door to Fink, instead stood on something outside by the transom and fired 3 shots through the window. Well, this theory also fell apart because of the distinctive scorch marks on Fink's left hand, which could not have occurred unless he'd been shot up close. So police then speculated that Fink was actually shot outside, from either the street or the hallway, and then ran inside and locked himself in the laundry before dying. It's a pretty good theory actually, and it would explain everything. However, the medical examiner then came and pissed in everyone's cornflakes by saying that the injuries Fink sustained would have almost certainly killed him instantaneously. So now, in addition to this whole situation just looking impossible, the next problem was that there was no clear motive either. Fink's pockets and cash register were both still full of money, so it wasn't a robbery, and Fink was not known to have any enemies. So police started questioning people nearby, starting with his landlord, Max Schwartz. Now apparently, there were two well-dressed women in the hallway outside the laundry just before the shooting, but Max would go on to say that Fink never consorted with women since his wife and family were still back in Europe, so the police dismissed the idea that the woman had anything to do with the murder. However, they would soon find out that a friend of Fink's stopped by the laundry that night at about 9:45 p.m., 45 minutes before he was killed. This friend's name is unfortunately never mentioned publicly, but he was described as Fink's only friend in the neighborhood. Police tracked him down and questioned him, and according to this anonymous friend, he did indeed come to the laundry that night. However, he saw Fink was busy with a black man and woman who were asking Fink if he had any second-hand underwear to sell. As strange as that sounds, in these days, it was normal for laundry owners to sell unclaimed items of clothing, and although Fink's friend had admitted to being at the laundry close to the time of the crime and saw Fink with two other people, the police never questioned him further or tried to track down the couple. And after this masterclass in crime investigation, the police just gave up, and this is where the case went cold. 2 years later, on August 3rd, 1931, NYPD Commissioner Edward P. Mulrooney admitted his bafflement on a WOR radio show called Man in the Front Row. During the course of this talk, Mulrooney admitted the police had just given up on the Fink case, calling it an insoluble mystery. So was Mulrooney right? Was this a perfect crime? Or did a small mistake throw the entire case off the rails? It is possible that that is exactly what happened here. Some detectives were quite suspicious of Fink's friend. However, since the medical examiner declared that the wounds would have killed the victim instantaneously, what use is there questioning people further when you can't even explain how the guy was shot in the first place? But what if the detectives were actually right and the medical examiner was wrong? We know two things for sure. One, he did not shoot himself, and two, Isidor Fink would have not just opened the door for anybody. Fink always kept the doors locked when he worked late because he was afraid of being robbed. So who did he trust enough to let in at 10 p.m. that Saturday night? An unfamiliar black couple looking to buy second-hand underwear, as his friend claimed? Or was it maybe the friend himself? Some people find the friend's premise questionable. People looking to buy unclaimed laundry may have been normal in those days, especially in the struggling economy, but looking to buy second-hand underwear at 10 p.m. on a Saturday night? I don't know, man. Plus, if you're buying anything used, it's probably not going to be underwear, not even in 1929. So one theory I'm a fan of is, what if Fink had let his friend into the laundry that night, alone? The two then got into an argument. The friend pulled out a gun with a silencer. He aims it up at Fink's face, but Fink grabs the gun. The two start fighting over the gun, which is what the neighbor hears, and while they're both holding the gun, which is still aimed at Fink since the friend is the one holding it, a single shot is fired, which hits Fink in the left hand. Fink then releases the gun and gets hit 2 more times in the chest. The next day, Fink's friend just points the police in the direction of a black couple, just in case someone had seen him stop by the laundry that evening. Unfortunately, this was common, and linking black people and crime was very much a part of society at that time, and this notion is actually what fueled the resistance movement in Harlem. Now, you probably noticed that I conveniently left out the part of how the door got locked from the inside. Obviously, this theory can only work if it is possible for someone who was shot twice in the chest to live long enough to slide a thick 7-inch steel bolt shut, then walk a short distance in his laundry before dying. And as it turns out, it actually is. A story a decade later from Scotland proved just how resilient the human body can be when struck with a devastating injury. In 1942, the pathologist Sir Sidney Smith, writing in the British Police Journal, recounted a case that almost defied medical belief. He wrote about a Scottish businessman who left his Edinburgh hotel one winter's evening. When he didn't return later that night, the hotel staff weren't all too concerned because this was normal behavior from the businessman. But sure enough, at 7:30 a.m. the following morning, the businessman rang the doorbell. When the maid opened the door, he was dressed normally and carrying an umbrella, but she noticed that his face was covered in blood. He brushed her concerns off, telling her not to worry about it, and that he would, quote, go upstairs and have a wash. He then placed his umbrella on the rack, hung up his coat, and went upstairs to the bathroom as the maid and the other people present stared in disbelief. Once he got to the bathroom, the businessman finally collapsed. He was then rushed to the hospital, but he would die 3 hours later before he could make any statements. However, Sir Sidney Smith didn't need a statement to figure out what had happened to him, and had no difficulty establishing the cause of death. The businessman had been shot in the head, right underneath the chin, and while Smith saw no powder or scorch marks surrounding the bullet hole, he did find enough powder traces inside the wound to strongly suggest a close contact .45 caliber gunshot, possibly even self-administered. The bullet had tracked upward through his brain, creating a massive hole at the front of his skull. Smith's astonishment over the medical evidence was matched only by the utter disbelief of the police officers. After going back to the hotel to investigate further, they tracked a trail of blood from the hotel to a public garden on the opposite side of the street. In these gardens was a gazebo-type shelter, and lying on a seat was a .45 caliber revolver, which was later confirmed to belong to the dead Scottish businessman. In front of the seat on the ground, there was a large pool of blood, and directly above it, in the roof of the shelter, was a sizable bullet hole surrounded by fragments of brain matter and bone. This was undoubtedly where the shooting had occurred. They could also determine that he shot himself before 6 AM that morning, since that's the time it started snowing, and they could follow a trail of footprints and blood spots which was visible between the fresh snowfall. So based on all of the evidence, Sir Sidney Smith had no doubt that the injury was several hours old when the man finally died, so this allowed him to safely conclude that the man had shot himself well before 6 AM. Mind-blowing story, if you'll forgive the pun. So if these details were available to the New York medical examiner who autopsied Isidor Fink, he might not have been so quick to dismiss the detective's original theory that he survived long enough after being shot to lock the door himself. Now, while I don't agree it happened outside, as evidenced by the steaming heated iron that was still on, indicating that it was working at the time, and the neighbor Lachlan Smith hearing the sounds coming from inside Fink's laundry, and I can't really picture a scenario where he got into a fight with a robber outside the laundry that led to him being shot 3 times, but no money being stolen. So that means that the best suspect is the only person we know that Fink would have let in the laundry at this time of night, his racist friend. So the theory is, he lets his friend into the laundry, they get into an argument, his friend pulls out the gun, the two of them wrestle over the gun, Fink gets shot in the left hand, lets go of the gun, his friend then shoots him twice more in the chest, and realizing what he has done, he flees the laundry. But Fink doesn't die instantaneously. Instead, he's able to rush over to the door, slide in the 7-inch steel bolt, and in doing so, creates this locked room mystery known as the impossible murder of Isidor Fink. So was Fink's friend the killer? If so, we unfortunately have no idea what his name is, and the police records of this case have mysteriously disappeared too. What are your thoughts on the story of Isidor Fink? Feel free to add to the video by posting your thoughts in the comments, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you again soon with another unsolved mystery. Thanks for watching.